Welcome to RSP Film and Theory. Adam Harstad, Matt Waldman. This week, we're going to talk a little bit about win now trades. Adam's latest article at Footballguys, his Dynasty and Theory pieces that are always great reads, and we'll talk a little bit about the gut check. We'll talk a little bit about Jayden Daniels and maybe some range of options to expect with him, because I think he's an interesting case study for development strategies and what's all kind of changing in the NFL anyway when it comes to the quarterback position and how teams want to handle it. And he's kind of at the epicenter of a lot of different trendy topics as a player and with the team that he's with. So, Adam, let's start off with your article, and you have a fun piece this week that really kind of looks at estimating the impact of win now trades, and then also like how to apply that information. So, walk us through that.
Yeah, I mentioned last week that I like to think about things and just try to reason through and come to an answer. And in the past, I thought about like realistically, what are the implications of a regular season win in fantasy? What are the implications of a high score in the playoffs? Like, how much do these really impact your odds? And then I decided, it's silly. I now have enough data and information, and I needed pieces like the rate at which teams make the playoffs at a given record. And I have that stuff now, and I don't need to just think about it anymore. I can actually build a model and test it and see if we change this assumption, what happens to a team's championship odds. So I looked at it as a fun opportunity to test my intuitions, and I kind of presented it to the readers as a chance if they wanted to test their intuitions, or if you just want to know what the answers are, you can absolutely just scroll past that and look at the answers. And so I started with let me see, what was the first one? Is it better to get a guaranteed high score round when you have a good team than when you have a bad team? And, some of the intuition would be that if you have a really good team, you're more likely to not be playing in the wild card round in the first place. If you have a really, really good team, you're very likely to get the bye. But you test it and you find out that even if you have a team that's got a 70% expected win percentage, it's still almost as valuable to take the guaranteed high score in the wild card round as it is to take the extra win in the regular season. Just playoff weeks, since they're single elimination, they're just so impactful. And then I also look at how much is the impact of one regular season win versus two regular season wins versus three regular season wins, and so on. And the intuition here is that, you think about it at the logical extremes. Getting one extra win, going from 0 extra wins to 1 extra win. If a genie just showed up and said, I'm just going to add 1 win to the win column for you, go from 0 extra to 1 extra, that's pretty impactful. You're more likely to make the playoffs. You're more likely to get a bye. But if the genie's like, all right, I've already given you 8 extra wins. If you want, I can give you a 9th extra. That extra win there isn't as valuable, because if the genie's already giving you 8 free wins, you probably already got the playoffs. You probably already got the bye. So it's tempting to think that each extra win you get is less valuable than the win before. But interestingly, when you model it, that's not the case. Where getting 2 guaranteed wins is actually better than getting 1 guaranteed win. Getting 3 guaranteed wins is better than getting 2, and getting 4 is about as good as 3. And the reason for that, and the reason for a lot of these unintuitive findings, is just because of the insane value of the bye week in fantasy football, of getting that guaranteed advance in the first round of the playoffs. And to get that bye week, you really need a pretty strong record. You need 10-4 will probably do it. If you're lucky, 9-5 might get you there. But really, if you're an average team, if you're expected to go 7-7, you really need 3 extra free wins to get you to 10-4, and then that'll give you a really good shot at the bye. And so that's why each win is more valuable than the win before, up to about 3 or 4, because each win is increasing your chances of getting the bye more than the win before. And then after that, once you already have the bye in hand, then the wins become successively less valuable. And so you can think about that, and you can think, in Dynasty, there's teams that okay, I want to push in my chips. I want to trade some future assets to get some present production to try and maximize my chances of winning it all this year. And that's when I have a very definition of a win now trade. To me, a win now trade is when you're giving up more value than you're getting, but you're doing it specifically for the purposes of chasing a championship. Like if you trade,
I can give you an example.
Go for it.
Yeah, so like, I in a league that I'm in right now, I traded. Let's see. Let me look at it real quick. Transactions. Okay, we'll look for trades, and then in the past 300 days, that'll get us where we need to be. All right, so I gave up Jahan Dotson, Andre Giosivas, a 2025 first round pick, and a 2025 second round pick for Derrick Henry, Keaton Mitchell, and DeAndre Hopkins, and a second round pick. And this is a team that already has a roster where I can start 4 running backs, and my starting running backs, I can choose from Etienne, Henry, Aaron Jones, Alvin Kamara, and David Montgomery. And it's a 2-quarterback league with Lamar Jackson and Dak Prescott. And my 2 starting receivers are Tyreek Hill and Mike Evans, with a bunch of other guys. So pretty much I've been like one of the top 2 teams in the league every year for the past 3 to 4 years, and just haven't won it. So I figured I would.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of a trade where like the stuff you're giving up is probably more valuable in expectation than the stuff that you're getting.
Yeah.
But the stuff that you're getting definitely improves your chances of winning it all. I would not consider if you trade 3 firsts for Justin, that improves your chances of winning, but I wouldn't call that a win now trade. That's one where you're just like, that's just good value. Like it helps me win this year, and that's great, but I'm doing it because I think the value of what I'm getting is greater than the value of what I'm giving. So generally I advise against making win now trades in general. I think the best way to have a strong roster is to never make value losing trades.
Right.
But if you're going to do it, it's important to know when will this have the biggest impact. And the reality is, because of this disproportionate value of the bye week, when you model all of the possibilities, the time to make a win trade is not when you're fighting for a playoff spot, where you're like, I'm 1 game out with 3 games to go, and I need to make this last push. And if I miss the playoffs, my title chances go to 0. And if I make the playoffs, they go to, whatever they go to. So like, I really need to acquire a piece for this push. That's not going to move the needle as much for you as if you're 1 game out of the bye with 3 weeks to go, and you're making a trade to try to push you over that hump. Really, it's better to make a win now trade when you're close to the bye and you're chasing it than it is when you're close to the playoffs and chasing it. Yeah. And in fact, if I were like 1 game out of the playoffs with 3 games to go, at that point, I'm standing pat and hoping I get lucky, or even potentially making some counterintuitive trades where I'm trading current producers and hoping I get lucky. Because you can trade, like I've seen a lot of teams make the playoffs off of like weird, fluky, hot stretches from guys like Darius Hayward-Bay, or like the famous one was Drew Bennett and Billy Volek, where they just went like supernova that 1 year and basically single-handedly carried all of their team to championship week, before kind of laying an egg and leaving them high and dry there. But if you run the numbers, and it's kind of fun, because it's not necessarily what I would have expected to see from the numbers. I kind of thought going in that like there's a lot to be said for you got to be in it to win it, and just trying to make sure that you're in the playoffs every year. But like really, it's okay. Like if you miss the playoffs 1 year to get a bye the next year, that's probably a net positive to your total life championship expectations. And there's a bunch of other like kind of weird and unintuitive findings that don't really make sense until you realize, oh, it's just because the bye is so valuable. increase your chance of winning by 5%. If you go from 50% to 55% in every week, that'll improve your chances of winning a title. If you go from 55 to 60%, that'll improve. And then you would expect that the marginal improvement would peak, and then at some point it would reach the peak, and then it would decline. And that's what you find up to a point. But then you get up to like going from an 80% chance to win to an 85% chance. All of a sudden you're getting accelerating returns again. And it's really just because there's two things you're targeting. It's like you're improving your chances of getting the bye, and you're improving your chances of winning in the playoffs once you're in the playoffs. And those are really two different things, and they're two very valuable things. And it's really important to pay attention to both of them when you're trying to manage your team with a short-term lens.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's and I like that what you've kind of discovered there is really at the end of the day, just don't do it. but if you find yourself, like the guideline would be try not to put yourself in that situation. But if you're going to put yourself in a situation, here's how to go about it. So I like the nuance of how you outline that.
Yeah. I still would say, I'm not a huge fan of win now trades in general. I've seen some that I've liked, and especially in a situation like yours where you've been so close for so long and you're like, screw it. I don't care if this is the right move. Like, I just can't take another, like, cost of another close, not quite there finish is a lot more painful to me in particular, given my history. So I'm going to maybe give up a little bit of value to avoid that. I had a friend in one of my leagues who we'd been playing for 15 years or like something crazy. Like we were in, and he had one of the best records in the history of the league, but he'd never won a title. And then one year he's like, 2 years ago, he's like, screw it. I'm going to trade for Derrick Henry. I'm going to trade for Travis Kelce. I'm going to give up all of my future picks. I'm pushing in my chips. Like I'm tired of coming close. And he did. He actually won back-to-back championships. So good for him. I think he probably would have won back-to-back even without one or two of those trades. But I completely understand the feeling where like, I'm not going to stand for this anymore. But I would say if you're going to make win now trades, I would really kind of confine them to teams where you're contending for a bye. And I just, as a rule, I just trades on teams where I'm really looking at more like the 3, 4, 5 seed.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Like for my situation that I shared, really, this is a team that I look at, and I look at the age of a lot of the players who are the main players, and I'm thinking, if I don't win it this year, maybe next, I'm blowing this team up. I mean, this team's going to, or I'm not even going to be able to blow this team up because it's just going to fall apart. So, I look at it as I might be able to sell off some pieces to teams that are now competitive for their win now, if they're looking at that, and be able to start rebuilding at that. But I mean, like, you look at this team and I think, well, Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott probably might have another 5 years left in them. So that's good from a superflex standpoint. But then when you look at when you look at Henry, before I got Henry, Jones, Kamara, David Montgomery, that's year to year. These guys are all year to year at this stage. And then
in for a good time, not in for a long time.
Exactly. And the same thing with Mike Evans, Tyreek Hill, Brandon Cooks. And that was really the strength of the team. I mean, other than having like pulling Dontavian Wicks and Josephus off of the waiver wire like last year and just holding on to them. Josephus just helped me get Henry because it was like, that was really it. And then Mark Andrews is my tight end. So again, also year to year at this stage. So I look at this team and I'm thinking, well, this is the year to make the push. And then at that point, we'll be moving forward. And if Montgomery or Kamara or Jones or Henry still have some value next year, I can trade them to somebody who's in a win now situation, collect some draft picks, and start trying to do a major rebuild at that point. And if not, then... And
I love the runway you're afforded, too, when you have good, proven quarterbacks, too. I mostly just play one quarterback leagues rather than Superflex, but I love quarterbacks. I get so many quarterbacks just because it's that safety net where, like, okay, I can mess around with the rest of my team. And, like, if I do something really bad and I'm out of it for 2 years, this guy's still going to be waiting for me once I'm back ready to contend again.
Yeah, exactly. And they give you some nice liquid capital if you have enough of them, even in a one quarterback league, because teams start getting desperate. I've already had that in a situation with a strong dynasty team that this year's off to a tough start, but having, still having Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, and Anthony Richardson, as that nucleus of a one quarterback team, I still feel like this team can be competitive. It's just dealt with a number of injuries, and if I need to deal one, I've already had people sniffing out for those players, and so it should be worthwhile from that standpoint. But quarterback, let's move on and talk a little bit about Jayden Daniels. Speaking of quarterbacks, because it's watching the Bengals Commanders game and seeing the reaction. First, I saw the reaction because I didn't see the game yet. It was like Monday night, and I was tired, and I usually wait till Tuesday morning to watch the Monday night game. But seeing the reaction, it was like, he's an emerging superstar. Everyone looked at the box score stats. What was he, like 20-22 or something like that, and he had that, and then you have that narrative making play, which is the deep throw on the double move to Terry McLaurin to basically go ahead late in the game, which is it was a fantastic play, on his end. I would argue, as a film watcher, it was a fantastic play because it was a pressure moment, and he was under pressure to throw the ball, but he did what he was supposed to do. Like, I didn't see it as like an amazing play as much as if it was a heady play for a rookie to make. But you see the buzz, and everyone's talking about Jayden Daniels in the same way that I remember they were talking about Robert Griffin, or in the same way that they were talking about Marcus Mariota, or even Will Levis after his 5-touchdown performance in his debut last year. And that doesn't mean that Jayden Daniels is is one of those guys and is going to fall off. But, when you take a deeper look at that game, and you take a deeper look at his season, it's fascinating because first you look and see that for at least the first two games, 37% of his throws were at or behind the line of scrimmage, versus the league average was 11% at the time that stat was quoted. And then when you look at then on top of that, a lot of these throws I would call they're like non-progression reads. So instead of a progression read where you have like a set number of like 3 to 5 players to look at in order, or you may switch. If it's not a pure progression read system, you can look at the defense, look at the coverage, and decide where you're going to start with those reads and make adjustments with it. But you're trying to get through anywhere between 1 to 4 reads most often. And you're, as a quarterback, you're really manipulating and making the choices as a field general of where things are going to go. Whereas with non-progression read plays, especially what I call schemed plays, RPOs, screen plays, throwbacks off of misdirection, rollouts to one side of the field, you're maybe at best you're looking at two receivers, most of the time really only one, and sometimes you're even just doing a look off of a receiver, and it's really window dressing to just set up the defense to go to that one guy. And those plays, I look at those as that's the bulk of the job to get that player open isn't on the quarterback, it's on the rest of the team. And so when I look at Jayden Daniels' performances for the first 3 weeks, it was very clear in the first 2 weeks there's a high percentage of plays where it was incumbent upon the scheme to kind of create the opening with the design of the play, as opposed to the manipulation the quarterback executes above and beyond just a play action pass or a roll to one side and a throw back to another. And it's still, required. there's still some technical skill required of that from a quarterback, but it's not the higher end cognitive functions that you're looking for from, the top field generals at this stage. So you kind of look at that element. And what was interesting to me, Adam, is that, on the one hand, I look at that and say, well, no matter what the players are saying, no matter what the coaches are saying, they're not putting the game in Jayden Daniels' hands in terms of like making the higher end difficult decisions on terms of how to manipulate a defense, create openings, and throw in the ball in difficult spots, at least for the first two games. And then the second thought kind of came to mind was like, that's a good thing. Because more often than not, you look at Caleb Williams right now, and he's being asked to make more of those types of decisions without an offensive line. And we're seeing how that's played out. Or with Anthony Richardson, without I would say polished, refined receivers, and that's not helpful either. And so if you're going to if you're going to complain or vent about how teams put quarterbacks in bad situations early on, what's better, to put them in a situation where they have to execute it at a much higher level of demand, or put them in an offense where it's kind of what I would call a slow launch, like, a slow launch for a business where you're not going to get inundated with customers because you're either limiting the hours or limiting how many opportunities people can come to purchase products, so that you can get your operation kind of steadied and get a taste of what volume's going to be like and what the demands are going to be like, and then you can slowly expand from there. And when you look at the first 2 weeks, Jayden Daniels only threw 2 passes in the first 2 weeks beyond 25 yards down the field. And he's known as a vertical thrower. But that was kind of an interesting thing with him. And then in week 3, you saw 4 passes that were thrown in that direction. So he had 4 of his 6 deep passes of beyond 25 yards in the Bengals game, and he looked good doing it. I mean, he made good throws, and I also saw more reads where he did have progression reads, where he got to his second read a little bit more often, and they were in the middle of the field or to the boundaries in the intermediate range, beyond 10 to 15 yards. So he had more of those throws as well against Bengals. So you can see that they slowly opened up the offense a little bit more there. But it's fascinating because, it just tells you about, people are talking about how great he is, but I'm like, is he being asked to do what Joe Burrow was asked to do? Is he being asked to do what Patrick Mahomes was asked to do at certain levels of his game, or some of the higher functioning quarterbacks at this stage? And I'd say there's potential for Jayden Daniels to be that, but if you look at what people are saying, even their team and their teammates, versus what he's being asked to do, there's a dissonance there, and it's only slowly being opened up a bit. So maybe we're a little too early to crown him like a superstar or even a fantasy starter year long. I think he'll be one, but I don't think he's going to be QB1 or even top 5 QB, because they still had a lot of throwouts, a lot of like schemed up plays where it's one read, and I think defenses are going to eventually, after those 4 to 6 weeks, are going to put the clamps down on some of that, and then demand more of the making second and third reads while getting a pass rush on him. And that's where he was weak. And at LSU, this is where he struggled when asked to do that, to the point that LSU's coaching staff said, if the first read isn't open, just run. Do more of that. They actually, they told him that midseason, and he made that switch. So it seems to me the Commanders know this. They created their offense so that they could ease him in, and on top of that, appease the media and appease, more importantly, the owners and GM and executives who listen too much to the media, so that they could get him in the game, give him some experience, and just cross their fingers that they're playing competitive football and that he can execute well enough and the team executes well enough that it works out. And then there's just Cliff Kingsbury's offense, because Adam, I've joked about that Kyler Murray's like the black hole in basketball. The basketball player is a black hole. The ball goes into him and then it never comes out. He never goes to anybody else. And I would say that Kyler Murray is kind of that type of player. I mean, other than DeAndre Hopkins, who was the number 9 receiver 1 year for him, he hasn't had a wide receiver ranked better than 26th in his 3 full years as a starter, where he's had healthy enough years to play most of his games. And then he had Zach Ertz for part of a year that was a startable guy. Otherwise, that's it. He hasn't really done that. And you look this year, and it's kind of the same thing with Kyler. It's like you really don't see him he either spreads the ball around so much because he's just looking for anybody open, but he doesn't really feed anybody. And when he did, it was, 2 weeks ago with Marvin Harrison, but he didn't do it last week very well. And there's still kind of flaws with his game. So I look at Jayden Daniels in Cliff Kingsbury's offense, and sure enough, at least early on, and it's too early to make definitive conclusions, but you look at it and you go, all right, Terry McLaurin is wide receiver 41, and he's their best wide receiver. Zach Ertz, I think, is tight end 9, but that's equivalent to, if you put the tight end wide receiver equivalency to it, that's pass catcher number 64, if you're not counting backs in fantasy, and that's it. Austin Eckler and Brian Robinson are serviceable. Running back 17 and running back 26, but their passing offensive production isn't really compensating massively here. So Jayden Daniels is a good fantasy option right now, but is he really supporting an offense that's going to long term be productive for, not only for the team, but for the other but for other fantasy options right now? And so Jayden Daniels, GMs don't care about that. Terry McLaurin people might, but that's something that I find fascinating about all this, is because it has that cross section of how do you develop a player. Maybe this is a good way to go about doing it. But at the same time, it's generating an inflated sense of valuation from about him. And we've seen Marcus Mariota, we've seen Robert Griffin, we've seen Baker Mayfield, and some of those players rebound and get better after they have a slump. Some of those players end up just journeymen. So I just think that, looking at Daniels, there's promise there. The fact that they opened it up this week in week 3 is a good sign, and he looked good doing it. But I wasn't looking at him and going, ooh, he's making Brock Purdy-esque, Jared Goff-esque, Matthew Stafford type of reads. If you get in those, and you're getting the running ability and the autonomy in this offense to do more than just schemed up looks, now you're talking about a superstar to me. Now right now to me he is more of a young Jalen Hurts in some regards, or a young Robert Griffin, or a young Josh Allen, where it's like, there's potential for high scoring, but we still have a ways to go before we coronate this guy. All right.
Okay. Sorry, we're having some technical issues on my end. Yeah, you mentioned his teammates' comments and how they're almost reverential the way they talk about him. I think it's important to remember that, you've heard of beer goggles. I think most of Washington's pass catchers have Dwayne Haskin goggles. And by the standards of what's come before, Jayden Daniels is the reincarnation of Steve Young.
Right.
You're not measuring against, to a man who's dying of thirst, like any cup of water is going to look like, the greatest thing ever. Yeah. About the difference. Good. Yeah, we talk a lot about like the difference between your approach and my approach. You're very process centric. You're going to be looking at what's going into a play, and I'm very outcome centric. I'm really coming out of the play, and by that standard, I think it's a good sign that Daniel has played well his first 3 games as a rookie. Like it's better than not playing well his first 3 games as a rookie. I'm not ready to coordinate him. I think the range of outcomes is still very, very wide. I follow a guy on he's in.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, I follow a guy named Kevin Cole, formerly of PFF, now he has his own Substack, and I find that he's one of the more careful and more nuanced data analysts. And he's talking today where, like, if you preferred Caleb Williams to Jayden Daniels coming into the draft, you look at historical hit rates. If you get a quarterback who goes number 1 and a quarterback who goes number 2, there's about a 55% chance that the guy who was picked first becomes true. Any players who go back to back.
Go ahead.
If you look at like historical hit rates, success rates about players who are taken back to back at a position, historically there's about a 55% chance that the guy who goes first winds up having a better career than the guy who's second. It's some advantage to be picking first, but it's not a huge edge. And 3 games is not a lot, but the gap, our prior coming in about Williams versus Daniels should not have been very strong in the first place. So it shouldn't take a lot to flip it. And so he's saying, if you look at historical results, if you compare quarterbacks who've started as good as Daniel through 3 games to quarterbacks who started as good as Williams to 3 games, even if you're accounting for the draft position, the performance to this point should probably be enough to flip your prior, where maybe now you think there's a 55% chance Daniel winds up being the better pro instead of Williams. And it's not about scouting Daniel and like looking at his progressions, or like scouting Williams and looking at his protections or anything like that. It's just that kind of affecting the uncertainty, because as you know, there's so many factors that are to the final outcome of a player's career, and so many of them are beyond the player's control, some beyond our ability to know, and so we should have this healthy respect for like the outcomes here is pretty big, and that's kind of where I'm at. When I see a player like Jayden Daniel, I'm not saying the guy who played at LSU, and I'm not saying his film. I'm saying the history of quarterbacks who were taken number 2 overall. And it's good history. I love drafting highly drafted quarterbacks in my rookie draft. I joke that like end of the 2nd round, that's who I'm taking. I'm just taking whatever quarterback went in the top 10 who hasn't been drafted yet. I've got a team where I have Patrick Mahomes and Dak Prescott. And last year I drafted Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. And this year I drafted Jayden Daniels and Michael. And the hit rate we drafted quarterbacks is so much higher than like a 4th round running back or a 5th round wide receiver or whatever other options are going to be available. But I'm just kind of looking at it like that. Like Jayden Daniels to me was the 2nd overall pick quarterback, and that oftentimes turns into a star. Just look at Stroud last year. So I don't really have a strong opinion of him, but I do think it is good. And I get that Washington is making his job easy. Some people seem to think that this is a bad thing. I would hope that all of my teams made their quarterback's job easy.
Right.
My quarterback was Tom Brady. I would hope that his offensive coordinator is doing everything he can to make Tom as possible. At some point, there's a limit to what a team can do, and the quarterback's going to have to do some things for himself.
No, I mean that makes perfect sense.
Than I was coming If we were redrafting Dynasty rookie drafts right now, I might have him number 5 or number 6 on the board. There's no way I'm taking him over Neighbors, Harrison Jr., or Bowers. I'm probably not taking him over Odunze. But then after that, I don't know. Like there's not even the guys who look pretty decent, just given how much uncertainty there is in their priors. I'm happy with a quarterback who has the NFL seal of approval and is doing cool and fun things this early in his career.
No, I mean, I think it's a great point, and I think it's also a good way of looking at. People can tend to have bias about the small differences in players to the point that while that may make a difference from a perspective of what team drafts him and why they want to draft him, that's different than fantasy. From a fantasy perspective, there's certain things that you don't need to care about. You're just caring about whether there's a chance that they will produce at a high rate. And like you do, like I would look at it as like you're looking at it and saying, look, I need a pair of shoes. Here's all these pairs of shoes. I'm not going to get attached to what brand the shoe is. I'm looking for these specific qualities that the shoe has, and that's where it's at. Where somebody else might be like, well, I want the laces to look like this, and I want the arch to be in this fashion, and I need leather or suede or some whatever the material is, and you get to the point of it where maybe now you're starting to get into like design when really it's about I just need to cover my feet and my feet to be comfortable, and I think that people who follow the draft get too far into the minutia that applies well to NFL teams but maybe doesn't apply as well to fantasy. Like if you've determined, as you mentioned, that look, I can get a quality quarterback prospect means that the success rate is going to be reasonably high at this value. I don't care who he is. I just care that he fits that criteria. Whereas so I like that approach, and I think it's a good kind of counter or complement to when you start looking at scouting reports like mine and say, okay, where's the point where I just look at this and say, I don't need to get too attached to the player. I just need to get attached to the position at its relative value on the board and what the success rate for that position is. So, no, I mean, I think that's a cool conversation. As you could hear, we've had some technical difficulties off and on throughout the show. It might be on my end, even though it appears it's probably on Adam's, but it might be on mine because we do have a tropical storm that's going to be moving through here at night, and maybe things are a little bit wonky around here. I don't know. But we're gonna go ahead and end this at about 40 minutes here, and just thank everybody for checking out the work that we do. You can follow Adam on X at Adam Harstad. You can find me at Matt Waldman. Of course, Dynasty and Theory at Footballguys. Among the rest of the articles you can find, just go to the search button, search bar, type in Adam Harstad, and you're going to find a wealth of material there. And thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.